Welcome to the next tutorial in GIMP. This is a very quick tutorial, part 1, about changing background color in GIMP. It's actually a very quick way to do this in GIMP, especially if you have an image that already has a background color you'd like to remove. So, the fastest way to change the color in your background is go up to Colors, Color to Alpha, and then you will see that there will be a color picker that you can pick down here, a little drop down box from blank color to alpha, and then you can click on this little eyedropper here, click on the image, then go back to your color picker, press OK, and you'll see on the preview that it has removed the color from your background. Click OK there. The color will have been removed from your background. You may now add a new layer to your image. Make sure to have it as a transparent layer. Drag that layer beneath your current layer, which you removed your color by putting it into alpha. And then you can use the bucket fill tool to switch to any other color you'd like to add to your image. And that is the very basics about changing a background color in GIMP. Welcome to the next in our tutorials about GIMP. In this tutorial, we're going to show you how to change the background color in GIMP. This will be part 2 of our tutorials showing you how to change the background color. Another way you can change the background color in GIMP that is quite easy is go to your image, right-click, add an alpha channel if it doesn't have one already, and then from there you want to use the fuzzy select tool to select the part of the image you would like to delete to give ourselves a transparency. So you can see here it has selected all of the color besides the text itself, and if we were to continue from here, it would actually get rid of the background except for the other colors that we need to get rid of inside of the letters. To add the circles inside the text, you want to hold down the Shift button, which will add a plus symbol next to your fuzzy selector, and you can now add those bits inside the text into your selection. And doing so will allow you to delete all the parts of the image you want to get your alpha channel. So once you're finished there, just hit delete on your keyboard, and you'll see the background is now fully removed. And just like before, you can add a new layer with a transparency, put that below your current layer, and add a new color to your image by using the bucket fill tool. And that's another way about changing background color in GIMP. In our next tutorial in GIMP, we're going to show you what some of the blur filters can do to our images and add extra cool effects that might not be available elsewhere. We'll start by using our blur, Gaussian blur, motion blur, and pixelize blur filters, and that way you can see all the neat types of things you can do with your image. As you can see, we started with a bunch of duplicate layers of our original image and renamed them to blur, Gaussian blur, motion blur, and pixelize. From there, we can select our blur layer, turn that visibility on, and then go up to the filters, blur, and then blur. And it'll add a subtle blur effect to the image. You can see it on here. It's now much different from the original image. The details have been lost. And then we'll go up to our Gaussian blur, turn that visibility on, go to filters, blur, Gaussian blur, and we'll turn the blur radius to about 11 seems fine. That's our Gaussian blur. And then we'll go to motion blur, turn that one on. Go to filters, blur, motion blur. We're going to make it a zoom, maybe about the center of the image here. The length of the zoom we'll put about 28, and it'll take a little bit longer to do this effect if your image is large. So now you can see that there is a kind of rush to get to the mountain look to the image. It's really cool. Then we'll go to our pixelize layer. Go to there, go to filter, blur, pixelize, and it'll create a kind of chunky pixel look to the image, so it'll actually kind of blur it out in something that's kind of like if you censor an image or protect someone's face or anything like that, you might see somebody has done something like this. So we'll set the pixel width to 7 and the pixel height to 7. And that is the pixelized blur on our image. So if we want to go back to regular blur, let's remove all the different visibilities of the other image. And we can change the opacity on this blur so we can change how much of the blur obscures the image, which is okay. If we go to Gaussian blur, we can do this with our opacity in such a way where we create kind of a hazy look to the image. You can see it looks like it's in some sort of a dream. Then to motion blur, if you wanted to change the opacity on there, it creates more of a kind of like ray-like effect coming out from the image itself. So you can dial that in as much as you want or as you like. Then if we go to pixelize, we can do the same thing where we can turn the opacity up or down on that, but it just changes whether or not the blocks show up. What we can do here is we can select part of the image and we can create kind of a border in the image. And to do that, we've selected a spot in the image. And then you'll want to go to the pixelize layer, add a layer mask, make it the selection that we've just put onto our layer, but invert the mask because we want a border on the inside and not just the inside of the selection as our pixelized blur. And then click add, and you can see now on the edges of the image, if you right click, select none, you can see on the edges of the image there's a nice pixelized border. And that's an intro to some of the different blur filters in GIMP. Welcome back to our tutorials in GIMP. For our next tutorial, we'll show you about the selective Gaussian blur and how it can be used to remove noise from your images. Just like our previous tutorials where we've shown you how to reduce noise, we can select part of the image that we want to remove the noise from. As you can see here, I have a selection. Then go up to Filters, Blur, Selective Gaussian Blur. And in that, you want to select where the delta is. That's basically telling the Gaussian blur how much of the image you'd like to remove the noise from, and set the blur radius so that way it can come out looking good. As we hit OK here, you can see that it has removed a lot of the noise from the image by getting rid of the noise through the blur. And that's just a quick way to show you how to do selective Gaussian blur in GIMP. Welcome to our next tutorial in GIMP. We'll go over more tools that have been used in GIMP to create different effects in your image. The tools we'll go over for this part of our tutorial will include the clone tool, the healing tool, the perspective clone tool, the blur and sharpen tool, the smudge tool, and the dodge and burn tool. Starting out with the clone tool, if you go to our image that you see here, it will not let you do anything with the brush until you hold down Control, click a source on the image, and then it'll use that source when you decide to paint on your image, thus duplicating the image as you paint over it. The next tool, the healing tool, allows you to heal parts of the image much like in Photoshop when you want to fix parts of your image that have blemishes on them or other various problems. Much like the clone tool, you have to set a part of the image that you would like to use as the basis for healing the rest of the image. And as we start moving through our image, it'll try to heal the image based on what's around it as opposed to the previous clone part where it just copied whatever it was using the source as. For the perspective clone tool, we can modify the perspective of our image, not in a permanent way, but in a way that GIMP will use when we decide to clone the rest of the image later. By going to the perspective clone option in the tool options, we can now set a source that we'd like to clone from, say this corner up here where the perspective will be changed, and we can paint that into our image. And as you can see, the perspective of the image in the upper left is now in our bottom right at a very different perspective. The next tool, Blur and Sharpen tool, we can set to blur. And then on our image, we can start blurring out parts of the image as we need to. And then if you set that to sharpen, you can sharpen parts of the image as you need to. You can turn up the rate on this to increase the sharpen amount, so that way you do not have to sharpen more than once on an image. If you go to the smudge tool, this will use the colors around it and smudge them together so they become more of a blur with all the colors that are included when you start smudging. The next tool, the dodge and burn tool, allows you to dodge, which is lighten up the colors in an image, but also do burn, which allows you to darken the colors in the image, creating more vibrant color as necessary. And those are some of the more advanced tools you will use in GIMP. In our next tutorial of GIMP, we'll go over some of the color tools that you'll use on your images to change various parts of your image. Much like Photoshop, these are some of the main tools you will use to switch color balance, brightness and contrast, curves, and more. So to start off, we'll go to the Colors section, Color Balance. This is probably the main tool many people use to change the actual color in the image to something that they think is much more appropriate for the image in general. And as you can see, we can change these values to increase more of the color that we want to add to the image or subtract the color. And we can change the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights of the image. The next tool is Hue Saturation, which allows us to change overall the hue colors that are added to our image. So we can make it a green or a pink or what have you. We can change the lightness of the image, how much extra light is in the image, or if there's more shadows. And we can add more saturation of color to the image or make it more toward grayscale. With the Colorize option, we can do this in a more direct way, where it adds the color directly over all of the image. And of course, you can do this with the saturation and the lightness as well. With the brightness contrast, we can change the brightness to be less on the image, the contrast to be more, and vice versa. With the threshold, we can change what the image sees in terms of darkness or light. And for this, I would recommend using a layer mask so you can have something to blend over the image itself instead of leaving this as its own layer. With levels, we can go in and change the gamma on the image, so we can reduce the gamma, make it darker, or add more gamma to make it lighter. With the curves, this is much like Photoshop, where you have a histogram, and you can set the points on the curves to drag down the shadows, increase the highlights, and change the way the image looks on a very granular basis. If you go to Posterize, it creates an image that reduces its colors into various channels of colors. You don't see many colors if you go lower on the Posterize level. That looks like it was created in older graphics editors. If you go to Desaturate, we've been using this in a lot of our previous tutorials where we can desaturate by removing the colors from the image, and we can choose based on the luminosity, the average, or the lightness in the image. And that is just a quick overview of all the different color tools you could use in GIMP. Welcome to our next tutorial in GIMP. In this tutorial, we'll show you how to use the Paths tool inside of GIMP. So go over and click your Paths tool here. And on the left in the tool options, you will see that you have the design mode, the edit mode, and the move mode. The design mode allows you to create points on your image that will create a path. To connect the paths together so that way you create a completed path, go to Edit once you are finished clicking on the last point for your path, and then click on the starting point of your path. That will complete your path. From there, you can move the path if you need to, and you can start doing a selection from the path or stroke the path if you need to. As a solid color pattern, you can set the pixels of the line, and so on. Another mode you can do with paths is you can create a new path where you can create a curvature to your path. and this allows people to create some very interesting and unique paths. To create this path, you must make sure that you have the polygonal option turned off, and that's a very basic way to use paths in GIMP. Welcome to our next tutorial in GIMP. Now, in our previous tutorials of GIMP, you may have asked yourself, how do I install those scripts, plugins, and brushes that I see on the internet for GIMP? For example, we actually had a filter earlier that we used called the Advanced Tone Mapping, and we actually had to install that into our GIMP plugins folder, and the wavelet denoise we also had to install. So how do you do that? Well, once you find the plugin of your choice, for example, when we had to get wavelet denoise, you can go into your folders for GIMP, usually under Program Files, GIMP2, and then you'll see the different folders you have for GIMP. If you go into the lib folder, then go into GIMP, then go to 2.0 or whatever the version is, you will find the plugins folder. And this is the folder you will want to bring any plugins that are exe files that GIMP uses as extra plugins for its program. As you can see here, the wavelet denoise program is where we put that plugin. For other different things you want to put in your GIMP program, you go to the Share folder, the GIMP folder inside there, the version folder inside there, and then you can see that there are brushes folders, scripts folders, and various other folders you can bring extra things into GIMP to use for your projects. So if you have a script, for example, the Advanced Tone Mapping script, this is where it goes inside your GIMP program. And once you've put those files into the correct folders you need to put them in, all you have to do is restart your GIMP, and you are ready to use your scripts, plugins, and brushes.